Romeo was a wannabe delinquent who fell in love with a baddie who turned out to be his sworn enemy. When he unexpectedly confessed, she agreed to date him, but they have to hide their relationship or risk betraying their countries. One morning, two rival dorms, the Black Dogs led by Romeo and the White Cats led by Juliet, clash outside their dorms to prove which group was superior. During the clash, Romeo declared he would take on Juliet alone, so everyone stepped back to watch them go toe-to-toe. However, when Romeo refused to fight with his full strength, Juliet got pissed because she thought he was looking down on her, but in reality, he was going easy on her because he was in love with her. Just as things got heated, the White Cats prefects arrived and forced them to wrap things up. Later, Romeo got extremely frustrated because he was unable to confess his feelings to Juliet because of the war between their dorms. However, he has had enough of it and decides to confess to her directly. Immediately after this, he went to spy on the White Cats, where he saw Juliet training hard, and even though she was already pretty strong, she wanted to be even stronger so that idiots like Romeo would stop looking down on her. Seeing her this angry, Romeo became scared and began rethinking his plans for confession. Just then, he spotted some White Cats harassing three young Black Dogs and quickly hid when Juliet came out to address the issue. After watching her handle the situation expertly, Romeo fell for her even harder and subconsciously left his hiding spot. Seeing him, Juliet questioned why he was there, but instead of confessing, he gave a flimsy excuse and then rushed off, which made her angry. Meanwhile, three Black Dogs were spying on Juliet, and when they found her walking alone in the park, they immediately ambushed her, even though she managed to beat two of them. The third one showed up and pepper sprayed her. This allowed them to restrain her, and they taped her mouth so she couldn't scream. Just when they were about to diddle with her, Romeo suddenly appeared and grabbed Juliet away from the boys. As she opened her eyes, she recoiled in fear because she thought he was also trying to humiliate her. Before he could explain anything, Juliet began to cry and ran away, making him realize that Juliet would never accept him now. That night, Romeo returned to his dorm and was greeted by the three diddlers, but he beat them up for ruining his love story. Just as he finished, he received a letter from Juliet, who wanted him to meet her by the fountain. When he got there, he found Juliet waiting with two swords, and she asked why he'd saved her earlier. Romeo failed to respond, so she assumed he'd helped her because he saw her as a weakling, and she didn't like that because she regarded him as her rival. When she started crying, complaining that he never fought her seriously, Romeo realized that in his attempt to protect her, he ended up hurting her pride. To make up for his mistake, Romeo agreed to fight Juliet without holding back, and she thanked her before tossing him one of her swords. But the moment they crossed blades, this stupid idiot blurted out that he loved her, causing her to blush in confusion. Juliet assumed he was trying to throw her off her game and started swinging again, but Romeo swore it was the truth and called her an idiot for not noticing sooner. Tired of listening to him, Juliet pushed Romeo into the fountain, but then got in herself and unexpectedly agreed to date him. Romeo started crying because he thought she hated him after what happened earlier, so Juliet waited until he finished before telling him that their relationship must be kept a secret. The next day, during their clash, Romeo pranced around like he popped some happy pills that morning, and when Juliet tried to hit him, he caught her baton and dragged her away. When Juliet learned it was so they could spend a few minutes alone, she told him that clingy guys were a turnoff. As she began walking away, the desperate simp grabbed her hand and tried to convince her to stay, but Hatsuki arrived just then. Panicked, he grabbed Juliet's face and lifted her so that Hatsuki wouldn't be suspicious, but that just pissed Juliet off. In retaliation, she kicked his jaw, sending him flying a few feet away before he passed out. Later in the locker room, Juliet was praised for being the first one ever to defeat Romeo. After the girls left, Juliet was shocked to discover Romeo hanging on the window, so she quickly tried to close the blinds. Romeo pleaded with her to listen and explained that he'd come to give her a rosary because he'd learned that in her country, lovers exchange rosaries as proof of their love. Before he could hand it to her, Scott, who claimed he had climbed the building to guard Juliet, interrupted him. He accused Romeo of seeking revenge on Juliet for what happened that morning, and Romeo didn't deny it to keep the truth hidden. The next moment, he attacked him, and they both fell to the ground below. Fortunately, they survived the fall, and when Romeo woke up later, he was surprised to see that he was back in his dorm with his head in Hatsuki's lap. Hatsuki was happy to see him awake and told him that their friends had gone to take revenge on Juliet for pushing him off the side of a building. Romeo immediately tried to go after them, but Hatsuki held him back, saying he wasn't supposed to be moving around yet. However, Romeo managed to escape, leaving her clinging to the dorm's mascot. Shortly after, Romeo found Juliet, but she tried to run away, so he chased her. As he tried to get her to stop, he realized that she was running because a mob of angry Black Dogs was chasing her. When he tried to get them to call off the witch hunt, Scott suddenly attacked him out of nowhere with a fencing sword. Following this, the Black Dog and the White Cat started fighting again, and during the struggle, Romeo accidentally broke the rosary. As soon as he realized what had happened, he went into psycho mode and effortlessly picked up a statue, which he began swinging like a bat. Surprised by the low-budget Hulk, both parties panicked and screamed at him to put the statue down, but Romeo ignored them, as he lamented the loss of the rosary. His actions got him in trouble, and he was punished to pick grass until nightfall. Out of frustration, he attempted to toss the broken rosary into the lake. However, Juliet arrived and stopped him, after which she asked him to row her to the middle of the lake. When they got there, Juliet suddenly reached for his pants, and he got excited. However, he told her that she was moving too fast. Juliet told him to stop moving, and the next moment, she pulled out the rosary from his pocket. When Romeo saw it, he asked her to throw it away, promising to replace it soon. But Juliet ignored him and instructed him to close his eyes. Romeo did this, but quickly reopened them when he sensed that she moved closer to him. Juliet pulled back because of this and complained that he was bad at taking instructions. Romeo tried to defend himself, but stopped when he realized that she placed a rosary around his neck and stupidly asked if she was secretly an alchemist. Juliet explained to the pea-brained idiot that she had given him the rosary her mother had gifted to her. Romeo didn't feel okay taking her mother's gift, and when he told Juliet this, she angrily started rowing back to shore. In an attempt to stop her and talk things out, Romeo fell into the water instead of helping him out. Juliet told him to take the time to think about what he'd done wrong and rowed away, ignoring his cries for help. Later that week, Juliet dressed up as a male black dog student because Romeo had begged her to do so they could hang out without arousing people's suspicions. As they left campus, they were approached by other black dog students who wanted to know who Juliet was. Romeo claimed she was his cousin Giulio, and immediately got jealous when he saw that the group had taken a liking to her. Unfortunately, he couldn't get rid of them, and they tagged along on his date with Juliet, which made him even saltier. He tried to keep them away from Juliet by threatening them, but that earned him a collective beating from some members of the group. As the day carried on, the group followed Romeo and Juliet to a seaside restaurant he'd been dying to take Juliet to. However, they were denied entry because the entire place had been booked, so they decided to go to a ramen shop instead, not realizing they were being watched. At the ramen place, Juliet accidentally knocked over her bowl, spilling its contents on her lap. Romeo immediately tried to help, but since he wasn't thinking straight, he tried pulling down her pants and got sucker punched for it, putting the incident behind them. The group visited an amusement park, and Romeo pulled Juliet into a haunted house for some alone time. Unfortunately, the girl got spooked, so she punched the zombie in him before yeeting out of there like her middle name was Barry. Romeo quickly went after her, and when he couldn't find her, he assumed she had returned to school. Dejected, he went to sit by the seaside only to be kicked into the ocean by Maru, one of the boys who attacked Juliet the other day. When Romeo tried to come up for air, Maru pushed him back under, refusing to let up until Juliet told him to stop. Annoyed with her interference, he tried to poke her eyes like he was Jerry and she was Tom, but Juliet flicked him onto his back with ease. She then warned him never to toss people in the water again. Later, she and Romeo went to the bell tower, where he thanked her for saving him and asked whether she was displeased with how their date had gone. Juliet told him that it was the most fun she'd had and said she couldn't wait for their next date, which made him happy. The next moment, however, Scott showed up, and the two had to pretend like they were fighting again. Weeks later, Romeo asked Juliet to keep her schedule open so they could celebrate their 1-month anniversary. They were still hashing out the details when Scott and Hasuki came looking for them, so they pretended to be fighting. Eventually, they asked the pair what they wanted, and they revealed that the princess of the Principality of the West had returned to school. Her name was Char, and she was nicknamed the Tired Princess for her behavior, so no one wanted to be on her bad side. The White Cats gathered to give her a royal welcome and cheered her on as she walked down the red carpet they had set up. Suddenly, she stopped in front of Scott and demanded that he tell her a joke, stating that if it wasn't a Kevin Hart-level joke, she would hit him. However, before he could come up with one, she hit him, and when he asked why, she claimed his life was already a bad joke. Before she could make him feel worse, Juliet stepped up to greet her, and Char thanked her for her warm welcome by pulling on her hair. Juliet complained about this bratty behavior and received a heartfelt apology in return before Char turned her attention to the black dog students gathered there. Like a spoiled brat, she complained about them not joining the White Cats to welcome her, and Romeo rudely reminded her that they weren't obligated to. Char laughed at his defiance and assured him she could command him if she chose. Feeling insulted, Romeo attempted to attack her, but before he could land a hit, Char told him she knew he was dating Juliet. Since no one was standing close to them, he was the only one who heard what she said, so he quickly tried to deny it. However, Char pulled out a picture of him and Juliet together, and the idiot fell to the ground in shock. The onlookers assumed that he'd been knocked down by the power of melons and started whispering about him being a weakling. Char then promised Romeo that she would keep their secret if he agreed to be her slave, so he swallowed his pride and agreed to her terms. Following this, she asked him to give her a massage, and while he was doing this degrading task, he noticed Juliet giving him a weird look and realized he was screwed. The next moment, Hasuki attacked him, trying to slap him back to his senses. She and the other black dogs believed his sudden change had something to do with the fact that he preferred melons over peaches. Later, Char and Romeo moved to a less crowded area, and she told him he had to come running whenever she blew her whistle. Romeo wanted to refuse, but she threatened to spread the pictures around the school if he did, so he fell to his knees and begged her not to. Char stomped on his head and told him not to defy her because the one who would suffer most would be Juliet. On his way back to his dorm later, Juliet approached him and asked if he preferred girls with bigger plots, realizing that she was feeling insecure. He tried to assure her that Char wasn't his type, but Char chose to blow her whistle just then. Having no choice, he begged Juliet to wait for him and rushed off to attend to his new master. She made him act like a pony and carry her around school so that she could humiliate him. As the black dogs watched him in disappointment, Maru proposed that they lynch him because he brought disgrace to them, and they agreed. For the rest of the day, Char summoned Romeo every chance she got, making it impossible for him to speak to Juliet. In the evening, he returned shirtless. A deer stuck to his side, and Juliet wondered whether he was involved in some outdoor survival game. Romeo assured her that he was fine, but said he couldn't tell her the details of what was happening. Deciding to trust him, Juliet wished Romeo good luck and pushed away when Char's whistle sounded again. Romeo then went to tend to the princess again, but made up his mind to find something to blackmail her with. When he returned to his dorm that night, he discovered that he'd been evicted. Maru told him to be grateful to Vasuki, as she was the reason he wasn't on his way to Heaven's Gate, since they left him no room to defend himself. Romeo accepted his exile from the Black Dog dorm. For the next 2 days, Romeo did everything Char wanted, but on the third day, he snuck into her room to find material for blackmail. However, the girl returned at that moment, suspecting he was there, so he was forced to hide. After checking the entire room and not seeing any sign of him, Char wondered if she'd gotten her facts wrong. Suddenly, she remembered something and opened the hidden compartment behind her mirror. To her horror, Romeo was in there along with all the pictures she'd taken of Juliet since they were younger. Romeo complimented the stuck-up princess on her debut as a world-class stalker and accused her of trying to separate him from Juliet because she was jealous. Enraged, Char tried attacking Romeo, and when she failed, she pushed him against the wall and screamed in his face, saying he would never understand her feelings. However, she broke down in tears the next moment and pleaded with him not to tell Juliet about what he discovered. Before Romeo could speak, they heard Juliet's voice outside the room, and Char immediately panicked because the evidence of her obsession was everywhere. Seeing this, Romeo asked her to calm her jugs and told her to stall Juliet for a bit. Char did this, but her talk no jutsu was weak, so Juliet walked in shortly after. Thankfully, Romeo had cleared all the photos and returned to the hidden cabinet. As she began brushing her hair, she and Char made small talk, but then Char got all serious. She admitted that she hadn't returned to school early because she was afraid Juliet wouldn't want to speak to her. Juliet promised that no matter what happened, she wouldn't ghost her because they were besties. Her words lifted Char's mood, and after a while, Juliet left to take care of something, so Char let Romeo out. Curious, she asked why he helped her, and he said it was because he needed something to blackmail her with. That night, Romeo and Juliet met by the lake to celebrate their anniversary, and Romeo saw that Juliet had fixed the broken rosary. She explained that she couldn't bear to throw something he'd gotten for her away, and Romeo started crying like an idiot. Close by, Char watched the lovebirds and wondered what Juliet saw in someone like Romeo. Weeks later, the Black Dogs held a compulsory reading boot camp, and since Romeo couldn't dip, he convinced Juliet to join him dressed as Romeo. When Maru joined their table, Romeo tried to get him to leave, saying his presence had raised the number of dullards in the room to 1. Of course, Maru clapped back, and just as they were about to begin a roasting contest, Hasuki walked in with a megaphone and ordered everyone like a drill sergeant. Juliet had never seen this side of her before, so Romeo explained that Hasuki always got like that whenever it was time to hit the books. Shortly after his explanation, Hasuki handed out practice questions, and Romeo fell asleep after reading the first one. Seeing this, Hasuki woke him up and forced him to stay awake by placing pegs on his entire face. In the evening, after Romeo helped Juliet sneak back to her dorm using the sewer, Hasuki came up to him and started talking animatedly about how the study session had gone. Somehow, the conversation shifted to his recent behavior, and she admitted she'd been worried he was keeping secrets from her. Romeo panicked, but swore that he wasn't, so Hasuki promised to always be his ally no matter what happened. Shortly after she left, Char showed up out of nowhere and started choking him, saying he was an idiot for bringing Juliet into enemy territory. She then kicked him to the ground and promised to take him skydiving without a parachute the next time he did something like that again. Romeo assured her that it would never happen again, but suddenly realized that the only reason she knew Juliet had been in his dorm was that she'd been spying on them. When he began complaining, she told him to shut up and accused him of cheating on Juliet with Hasuki. Romeo assured her that he didn't have that sort of relationship with Hasuki, but Char didn't believe him. She said that if Hasuki were truly his friend, he wouldn't hide his relationship with Juliet from her. But Romeo argued that it was okay for friends to keep their secrets. Realizing that she didn't have a suitable comeback, Char jumped into the sewer so she could return to her dorm. Romeo stood there, wondering whether to tell Hasuki about his relationship. Speaking of Hasuki, she was in the dorm library preparing to study questions for the next day when Maru walked in. He said he knew she had set up the study camp because of that idiot Romeo and asked what was so special about him. To answer his question, Hasuki took a trip down memory lane, explaining how Romeo had approached her when they were younger because he discovered she was the new Einstein. He had pestered her until she agreed to help him, and after he passed his test, he declared her his friend. Afterwards, those who had overlooked her began to notice her, and that became one of the many reasons she felt obligated to always help Romeo. Maru told her that her so-called obligation screamed desperation, but she responded that he wouldn't know what loyalty was even if it hit him in the face. Maru then left, and to Hasuki's surprise, Romeo walked in, after having eavesdropped on their conversation. Hasuki immediately grew embarrassed by what she'd said, but Romeo didn't seem to notice and asked why she kept doing things for him, since he was too dense to figure it out. Hasuki admitted that she was in love with him, which genuinely surprised him. However, his surprise was overshadowed by the guilt he felt about keeping his relationship a secret, so he rejected her confession and revealed that he was dating Juliet. As soon as the word left his mouth, Hasuki tried to snitch on him to the entire dorm, so he clamped his hand over her loudspeaker of a mouth to stop her. After he let go, Hasuki admitted that she reacted that way because she'd been caught off guard. However, this didn't mean she approved of his decision, and she wanted him to commit seppuku for betraying the black dogs. When she mentioned that she even cut off his head to ease his suffering, Bro got spooked and ran away. Hasuki immediately gave chase, and as they ran through the halls, Maru's friends came out of their rooms to investigate the noise. At that moment, Hasuki tried to cut Romeo, but he dodged and jumped out the window. Just then, Maru emerged from his room, and when he saw that the thread count on his friends' bodies was 0, he walked back inside and shut the door. Meanwhile, Juliet happened to look out her window and saw her man being chased by a sword-wielding Hasuki, so she immediately went after them. When she caught up with Romeo, he was chilling in a tree, so she asked what he'd done to piss Hasuki off. Romeo explained that she'd lost it upon learning of their relationship, so Juliet asked how he intended to fix it before he could respond. Hasuki arrived and tried to attack Romeo again, so he dodged the attack. However, he slammed into Juliet, leaving them in a position that left little to the imagination. Seeing this, Hasuki's green-eyed monster took over, and she tried to attack them for flaunting their relationship in her face. At that moment, Char arrived and stopped Hasuki's attack. Juliet then questioned her friend's presence there, so Char said she'd followed her to make sure she was safe. However, she revealed that she had known about their relationship for a while and said that because of the new development, she was going to mail Romeo to the afterlife. Hearing this, Romeo grabbed Juliet and fled, but when they reached the edge of a cliff, Juliet suggested they talk things out with the girls. The next moment, the girls showed up, so Romeo took Juliet's suggestion and tried to talk things out. Hasuki refused to listen and charged at him again, but this time Romeo didn't dodge and took a blow to the head. Thankfully, the sword was a fake and only injured him slightly because of the force Hasuki had applied. He told her he still wanted them to be friends, and Hasuki broke down in tears. Just then, Juliet slipped and fell off the cliff, so Romeo jumped after her. However, the idiot couldn't swim, so Char and Hasuki jumped in after them to save them. Once they were out of the water, Hasuki began scolding Romeo for endangering his life. Romeo apologized but said he'd done it because he was only thinking about Juliet's safety. Hearing his admission, Hasuki realized just how down bad Romeo was for Juliet and started crying because she knew he would never be hers. The next morning, Hasuki acted like the events of the previous night hadn't happened, making Romeo feel relaxed. Sometime later, while the Black Dogs were training for the upcoming sports festival, Romeo took Juliet to the storage, and to her surprise, it wasn't to get to second base, but to beg her to make him a bento. Feeling somewhat relieved, she promised to bring him one the next day, and Romeo became happy. However, he had no idea that Juliet's culinary skills were as non-existent as Saigam's hairline. While she was attempting to work her magic in the kitchen, the dorm's cook rushed in to make sure she wasn't trying to destroy the kitchen. At that moment, the oven dinged, signaling that Juliet's cookies were ready, but to Juliet's disappointment, they were perfect replicas of charcoal. The cook tried to cheer her up, but noticed the pot Juliet had set on the stove had caught fire. Next, the microwave sparked because the dumb girl left a spoon in the dish she'd put in it. In the end, all the food she had made was inedible, and she grew sad as she remembered how excited Romeo had been to taste her cooking. Later in the day, she met Romeo in the stable, and surprisingly, she had a well-prepared bento with her. When the impressed Romeo praised her, he noticed that Juliet didn't share his enthusiasm, which he found strange. However, when she said she'd feed him, he pushed his thoughts aside as his desire to taste her cooking outweighed them. He closed his eyes so he could savor the taste, but what he got was a mouthful of Char's shoes. Annoyed, he scolded the meddling princess and demanded to know why she'd done that. Char said it was because she couldn't let him taste Juliet's cooking before her, and then swiped the bento as she ran out of the stables. Romeo immediately chased her, but the girl was in her Robin Hood era and climbed a tree to escape him. However, when she tried to leap to the next tree, her shirt caught on a branch and she dropped the bento. The box flew a distance and landed on Scott, who was in the middle of training to break Usain Bolt's world record, while he was trying to figure out where it had come from. Juliet ran to him and apologized, saying it was hers. For some reason, this delusional idiot assumed she prepared it for him. Just as he suggested that they eat it together, Romeo showed up and drop-kicked him before reclaiming his bento. Scott immediately got back up and challenged Romeo to fight for the bento, ignoring Juliet, who tried to stop him. During the fight, the bento was sent flying again, and this time it landed in the school's pig pen. The pigs wasted no time devouring the meal, leaving both boys feeling sad for different reasons. After listening to Scott lament, Char dragged him away, saying she would make him her plaything for the day. Meanwhile, Romeo kept apologizing to Juliet for letting pigs eat the food she had made for him. However, Juliet suddenly blurted out that she wasn't the one who prepared the bento, and he couldn't help but feel stupid for fighting Scott for it. She then pulled out the burned cookies and told him he could have them if he really wanted to eat something she had made. Romeo gladly gladly took them, saying he didn't mind that they were burnt, but after taking a bite, he realized she had no future in the food industry. Instead of telling her this, he swore that they were tasty, but Juliet was no fool and she hid him for lying to her. Romeo then asked why she had failed to mention that she was useless in the kitchen, and she admitted that it was because she didn't want him to see her as anything less than perfect. Romeo assured her that he would never think any less of her and encouraged her to be herself whenever they were together. After school, Romeo went to watch the others train for the sports festival and got into an argument with Maru. Maru said he didn't want him competing in any event, since he made them lose the previous year. As Hasuki watched them, her classmates approached her, teasing her for simping over Romeo. Hasuki tried to deny it, but they knew the truth and advised her to aim for the most valuable player position. According to them, the position was a jinx, and if the winner danced with someone they liked at the after party, they would become a couple. Hasuki was skeptical, so the girls gave her a push by asking Romeo if he'd dance with her if she won the position, and he said yes. Later that week, Romeo was lying on the roof, wishing the sports festival was over when he heard the white cats chanting a degrading song about the black dogs, so he attacked Scott, who was leading the group. During their argument, Romeo tried to punch Scott, but his fist was caught by a crazy blonde named Somali who commended the strength behind his punch. She then excitedly rushed over to a boy named Abi, asking him to praise her for stopping Romeo's punch. Confused, Romeo asked who they were, so the two made a show of introducing themselves, after which Abi went to kneel before Juliet. He wondered if she'd date him if he won the Most Valuable Player award, and Juliet slapped his hand away, saying pompous airheads weren't her type. Abi apologized for his straightforwardness, but the next moment, he felt an intense dark energy and turned to see low-budget Vegeta and Goku powering up. Somali immediately tried to attack Romeo, but Juliet stopped them before they could begin another tournament of power. She then told them to save all their energy for the sports festival, so Romeo tried to leave. However, Abi had to open his big mouth to say something stupid, so Romeo started arguing with him until Somali interrupted them. Abi then switched his attention to her and said something which earned him a kick in the face. Surprisingly, he recovered quickly and promised Romeo that he would crush him during the festival. That night, Juliet sent one of her message arrows to Romeo, asking him to meet her in the field in the morning so he could help her practice for the three-legged race. Romeo became hyped after reading her note and remained that way until he met her in the morning. When they began practicing, Romeo had to fight many temptations because of how close he was to Juliet. To distract himself, he asked why she was so determined to do well at the festival, and she told him she was gunning to be the most valuable player so that she could impress her father. Hearing this, he decided to lock in and take the practice seriously. A little while later, they finished training, and Juliet admitted that she had asked him to train with her because she wanted to help him regain his confidence after what happened at the last festival. She then proposed they both aimed to be the most valuable player, saying whoever got it could ask the other to do whatever they wanted. Feeling motivated, Romeo crashed the black dog training and announced he was joining them. Days later, the festival began, and the black dogs faced off against the white cats in a tug of war. The white cats had Somali as their anchor, and the girl had the strength of 100 gorillas. However, she lost focus and let go of the rope because Abi praised her, costing her team victory. For the second event, they had to complete an athletic course and Maru was determined to win it. He easily took the lead, but his delinquent self couldn't resist the urge to cheat, so he scattered glass spikes on the ground. Seeing this, Char made her loyal subjects carry her for the rest of the race, and when Maru saw that the referee didn't stop her, he got pissed. While he was chewing the man's ears off for being partial, Char's lackey carried her across the finish line and Maru was livid. As the day progressed, the students played various other games and by lunchtime, both teams were tied. Romeo met Juliet during the break, and she told him her mother was nearby. If she won Most Valuable Player, her mother would tell her father. Not surprisingly, the only thing Romeo heard was the fact that Juliet's mother was around, so he asked if he could beat the woman. Juliet promised to introduce him another time, but when she realized the implication of what she'd said, she became embarrassed and ran off. Meanwhile, Abi was with Somali elsewhere, and he ordered her to sabotage Juliet during the next game. When the games resumed later, both teams competed against each other in the stick-down game, and Somali carried out Abi's orders by stomping on Juliet's foot. At the end of the game, the White Cats won, and even though Juliet's foot was injured, she ignored Char's advice to get it checked out. However, during the mixed relay race, her injured foot gave out and she fell to the ground. Her teammates rushed to her side, and Romeo tried doing the same, but Char stopped him, pointing out how weird it would look. On the other hand, Juliet tried to assure her team that she was fine, but Abi made sure to convince them otherwise. He said that if they allowed her to continue participating, she would drag the team down, and he painted it in a way that made the others start to doubt her capabilities. Scott tried defending Juliet, but Abi had already achieved his goal, and everyone, including the audience, began clamoring for Juliet to be taken off the team. Annoyed, Romeo screamed at everyone to shut up and then punched the wall because he couldn't punch Abi's stupid face. However, Char promised the manipulative jerk that he would pay for what he'd done and then took Juliet to the infirmary. Once they got there, Juliet's injury was examined and she was advised to sit out the rest of the event. When Romeo found out, he was beyond pissed, and when he started blaming himself, Char revealed that Somali was behind Juliet's injury, since she witnessed the entire thing. She narrated what happened to Romeo, but said Somali had acted under Abi's instructions. According to her, he had done it because he wanted control over the white cats, and discrediting Juliet was the only way to steal her position. She said they couldn't report him because they didn't have proof that he was the one who ordered Somali to hurt Juliet. The only thing they could do was teach him a lesson, so she pleaded with Romeo to take on the role of the Punisher and deliver the judgment Abi deserved. During this time, Juliet began to cry, feeling helpless. When Romeo heard her, he spoke to her through the door, encouraging her not to give up. He also promised to reclaim her honor by defeating Abi in the final event and asked her to come out to watch. Following this, he returned to the arena just in time for the final event, which was the cavalry battle. When Maru saw him, he asked him to take the horse's position, but Romeo took the knights instead, which led to an argument. Around them, the game was already in full swing, and Hasuki's team was winning until the girl acting as her horse dropped to her knees. Abi then used the confusion to swipe her ribbon, which removed her team from the game. Shortly after Hasuki was taken out, the white cats took out the other black dog teams one after another. For some reason, Maru's friends fell asleep, leaving Maru and Romeo as a two-person team instead of four. At that point, Romeo began to worry that he wouldn't keep his promise to Juliet, but he suddenly heard her voice, encouraging him not to give up. She had dressed up as Julio, and when Maru saw her, he assumed she was cheering for him, so he became determined not to lose. In the blink of an eye, they took out all the white cat teams except for Abi's team, because they wanted to enjoy it. Abi was still convinced he'd win, but his odds were greatly affected when Maru's friends tased two of his teammates. Annoyed, he tried to call a fall, but Maru told him that they had only paid him back for what he'd done to them. He then revealed that he discovered that the water boy had drugged the water he gave the black dog team, so he and his friends tortured him until he admitted that it was Abi who asked him to do it. However, they decided not to report the issue because they wanted to teach him a lesson about good sportsmanship. Somali spoke up then, swearing they couldn't bring Abi down even if they tried, and when she wanted to kick them, Romeo caught her foot. He then told Abi to stop trying to be like Loki and fight him like a real man. Hearing this, Abi lost it and decided to bore everyone with his villain arc recap. He said he used to be a fully loser whom everyone picked on for no reason. So he decided he was tired of it and worked on his weight. Once he gained the Chad physique, he decided he wanted more and resolved to become the leader of the White Cats in his year. However, Romeo was trying to destroy everything he'd achieved, and he wasn't going to let him. He then punched Romeo. So Romeo repaid the favor by throwing him into the stands. Following this, the announcer tried to name the Black Dogs the winners of the game, but Romeo screamed, saying it wasn't over. Confused, Maru asked if his brain had clocked out, and Romeo told him that his victory would be meaningless unless it were against Juliet. Realizing he was trying to help, Juliet asked Char to help her change out of her Julio disguise. Once she was back to being Juliet, she went down to the arena together with Char and two other white cats to face off against Romeo's team. Romeo made a serious effort to fight her, and as the audience saw Juliet push through her pain, they began to cheer her on. The match continued for a while, and as both teams were nearing exhaustion, Romeo and Juliet reached for each other's ribbons at the same time. However, it seemed that Romeo's hands were as directionally challenged as a certain swordsman because he grabbed Juliet's plots instead of her ribbon. The moment he realized what he'd done, his nose began leaking blood and he fell to the ground, thus making Juliet the winner. When it was announced that she was the most valuable player of the tournament, the arena erupted into cheers for her. 2 days later, the festival concluded and a party was held to mark its end. However, Romeo didn't attend it because his fellow black dogs had punished him to kneel by the fountain with bricks stacked on him since he'd made them lose. Again, while he was supposedly reflecting on his actions, Juliet found him and asked him to dance with her. Romeo happily accepted her invitation, but admitted that he was more of a street dancer than a ballroom dancer. Juliet assured him that it didn't matter and told him to follow her lead, which he did. As they danced, she thanked him for what he'd done during the tournament and promised that she would repay him someday. A month later, the prefects of the Black Dog and White Cats held a meeting, and during the meeting, Ayuru, the Black Dog representative prefect, brought up what Abi had done during the sports festival. While he was expressing his disappointment, Kate, the White Cat representative prefect, told him to give an arrest since Abi had already been punished for his actions. He also advised Ayuru to focus on Romeo, saying the boy was a wild card. The way Kate spoke annoyed Ayuru, so he challenged him to a fight, and Kate just sat there looking all smug. Meanwhile, Romeo was bedridden with a fever after working himself to the bone to make it up to the Black Dogs for losing the sports tournament. Hasuki did her best to tend to him, but she got jealous when the delirious boy mumbled Juliet's name and squeezed water in his face. She was soon whisked away by some students who said her attention was needed elsewhere. Alone, drifted in and out of consciousness, wishing he could see Juliet for a little while, and the next moment, he heard her voice. When he opened his eyes, he was surprised to see her standing there disguised as Julio, but convinced himself that he was dreaming. Juliet then asked if there was anything he needed, so he mumbled that he needed his ears cleaned. Realizing he wasn't entirely awake, she tapped him to wake him up, and that was when Romeo realized that she was not a dream. Embarrassed, he asked her to leave, but Juliet refused, saying he needed someone to tend to him. Looking around the room, she realized it was actually a storage room and asked whether all the rooms in the dorm had been taken. Romeo explained that he'd been forced to move in there as part of his punishment for making the Black Dogs lose the tournament. Not only that, but they also stripped him of his role as their leader and gave it to Hasuki, which was why she'd been dragged away earlier. Juliet sympathized with him, then offered to help him tidy the place so it would be more livable. While she was doing so, she found a dirty magazine, which Romeo swore belonged to Koitsuji. As for why it was in his room, the cultured idiot had given it to him because he assumed Romeo would be interested in looking at plots without armor. Juliet didn't believe Romeo's explanation, so he tried to prove his innocence and ended up making things worse by saying the only melons he wanted to see were hers. After seeing the look on Juliet's face, Romeo hoped the floor would open up and swallow him because that was the only thing that could stop the embarrassment he was feeling. Eventually, the atmosphere in the room returned to normal, and Juliet told Romeo she was going to get him some food since he hadn't eaten. It wasn't until she'd gotten lost that she realized that she should have asked for directions to the dining hall before leaving Romeo's room. Fortunately, she located the place after a few turns, and after picking up an apple and some water, she tried to return to Romeo's room. Once again, she got lost and ran into Maru, whose weird fascination with her led him to talk to her. When he learned that the items she had were for Romeo, he ate the apple out of spite. He then began asking her questions, which made her believe he had some idea of who she really was. Refusing to get caught, Juliet avoided answering his questions, and when she attempted to leave, he blocked her path, saying he'd let her go after she responded to his questions. Panicked, Juliet threw her tray at him and ran away as the water drenched him. While trying to find a place to hide, she accidentally wandered into the girl's bathroom and fell into the bath. When they saw her, they all screamed because they assumed she was a boy, so Juliet hurriedly escaped from there. Eventually, she made it back to Romeo's room, and when he saw that she was soaked all over, he offered her his clothes to change into, since she couldn't leave the room. Juliet asked him to turn around, and Romeo obliged. However, since he could see her, his mind began mass-producing inappropriate images of her, and Bro got excited. As though sensing his train of thought, Juliet tapped Romeo on the shoulder, and when he turned to face her, she poked his eyes. She then went back to dressing, and when she finished, complained that his clothes were too big. Romeo didn't get a chance to say anything because the next moment, a knock sounded at the door. It was Koitsuji, and he had come to collect his magazine for his gooning session. Romeo didn't respond to the idiot, and after a little while, he left, but Romeo didn't dare move a muscle. It turned out that when Koitsuji knocked, Juliet had jumped under his blanket in an attempt to hide. Juliet then apologized for the inconvenience, and when she sat up, she noticed that Romeo's fever had spiked. Since she couldn't do anything other than wait for the fever to break, she sat by him and sang a lullaby. Romeo was familiar with the tune, but couldn't remember where he'd heard it, so he asked where she learned to sing it. Juliet said it was a popular song from her country that her father used to sing to her when she was younger. Satisfied with her answer, Romeo sat up, allowing her to take his temperature, which was finally back to normal. He thanked her for coming to look after him, and Juliet said that she hadn't even known he was sick. She had come to hang out with him, only to find him sick. Her admission set Romeo on fire, so Juliet panicked, thinking his fever had returned in full force. Later that week, Kachu and Teria, members of the Black Dog Prefects, overheard students talking about a festival in town. The girls then went to find Ayiru to tell them what they heard, and he instructed them to attend the festival to keep an eye on the students. Meanwhile, somewhere on campus, a fully recovered Romeo hid under a bench while he was speaking with Juliet, who was hiding in the sewer. He told her about the festival, asking if they could attend together, and she said she'd love to. However, she made it very clear that she wouldn't be going as Giulio because she wanted to avoid Maru. She said that she would meet him there and promised they would watch the fireworks together. Once she left him alone, Bro came out of hiding and began celebrating his first official date. His celebration was cut short when Kachu fell from the tree into his arms, surprising him. Romeo then asked the low Lee who she was, but Kachu ignored his question to point out that he was cupping a feel of her plots. Realizing that she was right, he apologized, saying he couldn't tell the difference between it and her back. His words angered her, so she called him a rude brat. However, Romeo dismissed her, saying she ought to be thanking him for catching her. In response to this, Kachu bit him, and as he tried to shake her off, Teria fell on top of him. Eventually, everyone settled down, and Kachu asked Romeo to look at them properly and tell her what he noticed since he'd been talking down to them the entire time. Unsurprisingly, he saw nothing and asked the girls whether they thought they were monkeys, since they'd fallen out of a tree. Teria explained that they had climbed it to save a cat, and just then, Hasuki arrived. When she saw the girls, she apologized to them on Romeo's behalf, as she could tell he'd been rude to them. But the dumb idiot didn't understand why she'd apologize to people in desperate need of a growth serum. Hasuki then revealed that the girls were prefects but didn't change how Romeo saw them, and that pissed Kachu off. However, she pointed out that punishing him would be a waste of time and asked what he'd been doing under the bench. Romeo claimed he'd been chilling with the ants, causing the girls to feel pity for the lonely fool. Hazuki offered to share her friends with him, but Romeo felt insulted and stormed off in annoyance. Later that day, when Romeo returned to his cardboard box room, he found the twins had made themselves at home. Unhappy with their intrusion, he demanded that they leave, but they refused, saying they had come to deliver him from eternal loneliness. Convinced they were clowning, he tried a firmer approach. So Teria responded by holding up the rosary Juliet had given him. It was proof that they had gone through his things, and when he tried to grab it, he accidentally fell into bed with her. Seeing this, Kachu immediately accused him of trying to take advantage of her sister, so he apologized for his mistake. However, he couldn't stop himself from asking if they were really related because he'd noticed that Teria had a pair on her, although she was annoyed. Kachu chose not to banter with the idiot and asked why he'd been desperate to take the rosary back, since he was a bad liar. Romeo ran out of the room, and even though the girls were right behind him, he still gave them the slip, so they decided to search for him at the festival. When they arrived at the location, Teria's eyes lit up, but Kachu reminded her to stay focused as they were there to do their jobs as prefects. As luck would have it, they noticed Romeo casually walking towards them, and when he saw them, he fled again because he didn't want them to interfere with his date. The twins chased him, but after searching for a while without finding him, Teria suggested they check the forest. At that moment, Juliet, who was also searching for Romeo, wandered into the forest, calling out his name. When Romeo heard her, he popped out of his hiding spot like a jack-in-a-box, causing Juliet to scream. He quickly instructed her to lower her voice and pulled her into the bushes with her because he knew the twins had heard her scream. While hiding, Romeo accidentally stepped on a fallen branch and the sound drew the girls to them. However, when they checked the place, all they saw were cows, which Romeo and Juliet had hidden behind. Believing they had heard wrong, the girls decided to check other places, and for the rest of the night, Romeo and Juliet ran and hid from the twins. Ultimately, they ended up in an empty barrel, and since it was a tight squeeze, Juliet's pillows were pressed against Romeo's chest. He got so excited that he subconsciously subscribed to Culture Bros, and even when he attempted to rid himself of the visuals, he couldn't. The internal struggle was so great that a miniature angel and devil visited him, and things quickly escalated. Realizing that he would be screwed 1,000 ways to Sunday if he didn't get out of the barrel, Romeo looked through a hole to see if the twins had left. What he saw was them taking down some unruly students before they returned to standing at the side. Seeing this, Romeo decided to take matters into his own hands, so he stepped out of the barrel and asked Juliet to wait, saying he had something to do. A little while later, he shot a cork at the unsuspecting girls and invited them to battle against him in some games. The girls didn't want to, so Romeo threatened to wreck the stalls if they didn't, and they immediately changed their minds. Surprisingly, they enjoyed themselves more than they expected, and Kochu was a bit sad when it was over. However, Romeo cheered her up by saying that since he'd lost, he would play with them again if they wanted him to. He then revealed that he'd invited them to hang out with him because he'd heard from their classmates that they were friendless losers like him. The girls were surprised, but Kochu pretended that what he'd said was a lie, and like a true Sundar, she nonchalantly said they would call him if they felt the urge to lower their thinking capacity. After they left, Romeo tried to return to Juliet, but the fireworks went off while he was halfway there. Having no choice, he waited until after everyone had left to help Juliet out of the barrel and pleaded with her to forgive him. Juliet said she wasn't angry with him because she'd seen what he did for the twins and was proud of him. Romeo suggested they play with sparklers before returning to school since they had failed to watch the fireworks together, and Juliet agreed. Days later, while Romeo was marking Juliet's birthday on his calendar, Kochu suddenly popped up behind him, startling him so much that he poked her with his marker. Kochu screamed at him for doing this, but Romeo argued that if she hadn't scared him half to death, he wouldn't have done that. He then looked around and noticed that Tara wasn't there, so he asked Kochu where she was. Kochu said that Teria was underneath his bed, casually adding that she'd been there since the night before, just as her sister revealed herself to them. According to her, Teria had a habit of following those she liked, so Romeo asked if her real name was Joe Goldberg. The girls pretended not to hear him, and Kochu told Tara that she'd come to get her so they could go into town together. Hearing this, Romeo volunteered to be their errand boy, so he had an excuse to shop for a present for Juliet. The twins had no reason to say no to him, so they gave him their list and Bro left happily. Later in town, Romeo spotted a stuffed cat that he felt would be the perfect gift for Juliet and tried to take it. Coincidentally, Char picked it up at the same time, so they began struggling over it, each refusing to let it go. In the end, it ripped, and Romeo quickly blamed Juliet, acting as if he were blameless, so an argument started between them. Their voices caught a police officer's attention, who scolded them for causing a ruckus. However, when he recognized Char, he immediately apologized. He then advised her to return to school, as the town was currently crawling with 2 radicals who wouldn't think twice about hurting her. Char wasn't prepared to return to school, so she told the man that she would be fine since she'd brought an escort with her. The next moment, she pulled Romeo into a random shop, and when they re-emerged, he was cosplaying as a blonde-haired white cat. The officer Hector immediately tried to voice his disagreement, knowing Romeo was a black dog, but Char shut him down. After they walked away, Romeo voiced his displeasure and told Char that he wasn't going to act as her bodyguard. When he tried to leave, Char offered him a deal. If he helped her, she would tell him what gift to get for Juliet, and Romeo took it. Char then took him to a lingerie store and picked out some pieces which she swore would look good on Juliet. At first, Romeo acted like he didn't care. The thought of Juliet wearing those pieces sent him into heat, and he got a nosebleed. When Char finished shopping, they left the store, and as they walked, they got into another argument, with Char throwing shades at Romeo for not knowing what his girl liked. Suddenly, it started raining as though the heavens were telling them to shut, so they rushed to find shelter. While they were waiting, Char tried to wring out her blazer, but couldn't since laundry had never been part of her job description, so Romeo took over. However, the brute used too much strength, causing the blazer to rip in several places, so Char threw another jab at him. Romeo pretended not to have heard her and told her to put the blazer back on, but she noticed he avoided looking at her. It didn't take long for her to figure out that it was because her plot covers were showing, so she decided to mess with him. Channeling her inner succubus, Char seductively told Romeo that she had more experience than Juliet in the ways of the sheets and promised that if he broke up with Juliet, she would show him the hidden eighth wonder of the world. Surprisingly, Romeo wasn't the least bit moved by her words and flicked her forehead, saying he'd rather fight a bear than have anything to do with her. Char's anger quickly rose after hearing this, so she kicked Romeo, and when she noticed the rain had stopped, she told him she no longer required his services. She then walked away, refusing to speak to him again, and when she got to a tunnel, she was ambushed by the 2-1 radicals the policeman had warned her about. Char wasn't even intimidated by them, and after she knocked one of them down, she told his partner not to underestimate her. Just then, Romeo arrived, and when the man saw that he was a black dog, he asked him to help him put Char in her place. However, Romeo slammed the dude's head against the wall and proudly told him that he was with Char. This prompted the princess to ask why he'd saved her, and he told her it was because Juliet would be sad if she were to get hurt. Seeing how serious he was being, Char burst out laughing and told him he was much more than a down bad simp. Later that day, the two stood together watching the sunset, and Char suddenly told Romeo that what Juliet actually wanted for her birthday was to spend time with him, since she was just as much a simp for him. She admitted she was jealous of him because he would see the sides of Juliet she never would. Looking at her, Romeo realized that she was crying and tried to comfort her, but Char was allergic to affection, so she threatened to break his fingers if he touched her. She handed him the shopping bag she'd been carrying, saying it was to thank him for being her bodyguard for the day. After she walked away, Romeo checked the bag and was shocked to find a plot cover. That night, Juliet sent him another arrow, and in the note attached to it, she asked him to meet her at the library, so he went there. When Juliet saw him, she asked if he would like to spend her birthday with her, and he said he would, which made her happy. However, she warned him that he wasn't allowed to crash her birthday party like he always did, and he admitted he always did it because it was the only way he could celebrate her birthday with her. He then asked what gift she wanted, and she told him that she wanted a couple accessory. A little while later, as Romeo was happily skipping to his room, he noticed Hasuki standing outside his door. Deciding to mess with her, he quietly snuck up on her, and after achieving his goal of scaring her, he asked why she was there. Hasuki tried to respond but was cut off by Ayuru, who was standing inside the room with the twins, and Romeo's blood ran cold. Seeing the representative prefect in his room was the last thing Romeo expected that day, and his fear of him wasn't because of his position, but because he was his older brother, who had terrorized him while growing up. As Romeo stood staring at his brother, Ayuru approached him and asked why he had a rosary among his possessions. The twins immediately apologized to Romeo, swearing that they hadn't snitched on him. Ayuru just happened to overhear them talking about the rosary and decided he wanted to know more. Romeo was too shocked to respond to either of them, so Hasuki stepped in, and she told Ayuru that Romeo had bought the rosary for her because she had asked him to buy her something shiny. Ayuru felt her answer was sus, so he decided to pry further and asked Romeo why he had a plot cover in his room. At that point, Romeo was too stunned to speak, so Ayuru asked whether his recent change was due to him secretly dating a white cat girl. He reminded Romeo that their countries had a long-standing feud that could lead to war at any moment, and swore he would have him expelled if he discovered his suspicions were true, because that would make him a traitor. When he said he would have him kicked out of the family, Hasuki spoke up to defend Romeo. However, Ayuru cut her off, accusing her of being his accomplice. Hearing his brother's accusation, Romeo snapped out of his fear-induced silence and defended Hasuki's loyalty to the black dogs. He'd also assured Ayuru that he wasn't a traitor, but Ayuru said it was hard to believe the words of a troublemaker like him. The next moment, he grabbed Romeo and hoisted him in the air as he began berating him for all the stupid things he'd done in the past. Tyrion attempted to get Ayuru to put Romeo down by latching onto Romeo, but Ayuru refused to put him down. Seeing this, Khonshu began hitting Ayuru and demanded that he stop bullying Romeo, so Ayuru gave up and let him go. However, he informed Romeo that he would be under surveillance for a week to ensure he wasn't a turncoat. Only when his doubts about him were clear would he set him free. Romeo knew he couldn't go against his brother's decision, and since Juliet's birthday was in exactly 1 week, he decided he'd play the long game and get Ayuru off his back before then. The next day, Juliet tried her hand at making cookies again, and this time they came out perfect. The cook also testified that they didn't taste like sawdust, and this made Juliet happy. She took the cookies to school, and after she shared them with Char and Scott, the two praised them as well. Curious, Char asked why she had made cookies, and Juliet claimed she had just had the urge to do it. Char told her to stop capping and said she knew the cookies were for Romeo. She then began plotting how to slip some sleeping pills into the next batch so she could mess with Romeo a little. She was soon drawn out of her head when she heard someone say that Romeo was rolling with the black dog prefects. Intrigued, she joined everyone at the window, and Scott said he was probably being punished for something. Meanwhile, a nosy Kachu asked Romeo why he and Ayuru were close, and Romeo said it was because Ayuru was a tyrant. He explained that Ayuru was only nice at school, but at home he turned into someone else. He was always ready to punish Romeo whenever he did something wrong and always watched him like a hawk, even going as far as timing his bathroom breaks. As the week progressed, Romeo dutifully followed Ayuru everywhere, so he never got the chance to even speak to Juliet. One afternoon, the brothers had an intense kendo sparring session, and Romeo got beaten more times than he cared to admit. Hasuki couldn't help but feel sorry for Romeo, but Mario was glad to see him get a royal beating. After the session, as Hasuki walked to the dorm with Romeo, she tried to give him a pep talk, hoping to cheer him up, but Romeo assured her he was fine. He then revealed that he'd only been pretending to submit because it was the only way to get Ayursu to loosen his hold on him. Hasuki was impressed to see her stupid friend using his brain for once. However, she reminded him that Ayuru was built differently. If he discovered Romeo's deception, he would make good on his promise, but Romeo assured her that it would never happen. He then walks away, but Hasuki stays back to think, and that's when Juliet approaches her, asking for a detailed explanation of what's happening with Romeo. 2 days later, Romeo tried to sneak out of his dorm to see Juliet, since it was the night before her birthday, but he ran into Ayuru. The older sibling had already figured out that his brother was playing him, so when Romeo proved it by trying to sneak out, he ordered him to return to his room. Romeo refused and tried to fight his way out, but Ayuru was stronger. After he beat him up, he locked him in a shed, telling him to use the time to reflect on his actions. A few minutes after Ayuru left, the twins came and unlocked the shed, and it became clear that Romeo had deliberately let Ayuru catch him. A few hours before, he'd gone to the twins and convinced the girls to help him, even though he refused to tell them the reason he needed to be away from the dorm. After he thanked the girls for freeing him, they reminded him that he had to return before Ayuru came to check on him. As he ran to the meeting place, Romeo felt his body growing weak, but he forced himself to keep going because he didn't want to disappoint Juliet. Unfortunately, his body couldn't handle the strain, so he collapsed. Surprisingly, his head landed in Juliet's lap, so he asked why she was there and not at their meeting point. Juliet explained that she had been on her way to stop him because Hasuki had told her everything that was happening. She then started crying and blaming herself for what happened to him. Romeo tried to explain that it wasn't her fault, but Juliet wouldn't listen and kept apologizing to him, saying it was her turn to take care of him. The next day, Scott gathered some white cats so they could plan Juliet's birthday party, but Romeo suddenly arrived and drop-kicked Scott. When Scott began complaining, Romeo ignored him as he'd come there looking for Juliet. Coincidentally, Juliet and Char passed by, and when Juliet saw Romeo, she told Char she was returning to the dorm to get something. Romeo quickly followed her, but when he realized that she was actually avoiding him, he forcefully cornered her. The position he took put his package in her face, but he didn't care and told her that she couldn't avoid him forever. Juliet pointed out that someone could see them and go snitch to his brother, but Romeo said he didn't care. He asked if she was okay with never speaking to him again, and Juliet admitted she wasn't, however. She said she wasn't ready to risk them being found out. She then pushed him to the ground and told him that she didn't want to see him at the moment. Long after she left, Romeo remained on the ground and was accidentally stepped on by Hasuki and another girl as they made their way to class. Seeing as he looked like he was on death's door, Hasuki rushed him to the infirmary, where he regained consciousness. When he explained what had happened, Hasuki told him Juliet had done the right thing. She tried to make him see that he was being reckless, but when she noticed how bummed out he was, she suggested they play hooky. After leaving the infirmary, the two headed to their dorm, and Hasuki proposed they play billiards. Romeo admitted he didn't know how to, so she'd offered to teach him. During the lesson, the dumb guy accidentally poked Hasuki's melons with his cue stick, so the girl became too embarrassed to continue. Following this, they went to the school farm to pet the sheep, but the animals avoided Romeo and flocked to Hasuki. Their undivided attention made Hasuki a bit uncomfortable, so she told Romeo they were leaving. Next, they went to the bell tower, and while admiring the view before her, Hasuki didn't realize that the ledge was unstable. It eventually gave way, almost causing her to fall, but Romeo reacted quickly, and after he saved her, Hasuki thanked him. When she realized he hadn't let go of her waist, she became flustered and promptly moved away to bang her head against the wall. Her actions confused Romeo, but Hasuki assured him that she was still 100% sane. He then suggested that they return to the dorm, and Hasuki agreed. However, she couldn't stop herself from saying she would love to come up to the tower again to enjoy the view. When Romeo heard it, he remembered Juliet and fell back into his old, sad, mopey self. Speaking of Juliet, she had locked herself in her room and was drowning in her sorrows, missing Romeo. When Char returned and saw her like that, she called out to her. But Juliet didn't hear her. It wasn't until she tried a few more times that Juliet snapped back to reality and apologized for zooming out. Char observed her friend closely, and when she noticed the cookies beside her, she asked why she hadn't given them to Romeo the night before. Juliet explained everything to her and blamed herself for Romeo's predicament. When she started crying again, she admitted that the distance between them hurt. Later, Char went to find Romeo, and when she saw he was with Hasuki, she attacked Hasuki, smacking her melons. She then told her that if she'd used them to seduce Romeo a long time ago, he'd have fallen for her and not Juliet, and her friend wouldn't be suffering at the moment. Turning her attention to Romeo, she gave him the cookies and complained about how she'd been reduced to a messenger for the sake of her friend. She then bid them farewell, saying she was going to get ready for Juliet's party. Once she was gone, Romeo ate his cookies and started crying because they tasted so damn good. Eventually, he made a decision and asked Hasuki if she was interested in crashing a party, and Hasuki told him that she was. A little while later, Juliet went to speak with Kate but was interrupted by another student who came to inform Kate that they were under attack. When Juliet heard the intruders were the black dogs, she tried to leave, but Kate stopped her, saying it was a bad idea. He pointed out that she was their target and advised her to stay away from the main area for now. Meanwhile, Romeo and his fellow black dogs were downstairs demanding that Juliet come out so they could wish her a happy birthday. Scott and some other white cats answered their call, and they came with their own pies. The next moment, pies began flying everywhere, but Romeo managed to avoid getting hit and sneaked upstairs to find Juliet. While trying to figure out which way to go, he was ambushed by Somali and Abi, who looked like he'd gone shopping in a dumpster. Curious, Romeo asked what happened to him. So he explained that he'd been kicked out of the dorm and had been living in the yard since the sports festival. However, he was going to sort out his living conditions by catching Romeo and delivering him to the white cats. Seeing as Somali wouldn't let go of him, Romeo decided to trick her into releasing him by telling her that Abi was jealous about how cozied up she was to him. Immediately, Somali let go of Romeo and latched onto Abi to prove to him that he was the one she wanted. Romeo then used their distraction to move to the next floor, but he was stopped by a group of white cat students who tried to attack him. Fortunately, he was saved by Kate, who pulled him up to the ceiling. When the coast was clear, they came back down, but Romeo knew he couldn't trust the guy since he was a white cat. When he attempted to escape, Kate followed him and told him where to find Juliet. Just then, Annie arrived with some side characters and scolded Kate for toying with Romeo, so he called her a Debbie Downer. He then dropped the charade and introduced himself to Romeo as the representative prefect of the White Cats, which shocked Romeo. As a busybody, Annie spoke up, advising Romeo to give up, and Kate added that if he refused, things could get ugly. While this standoff was happening, Juliet was trying desperately to get out of the room she'd been locked in. When she realized that the door would budge, she decided to risk it all by going out the window. Back downstairs, Romeo refused to surrender, so Kate started to beat him. As he tried to think of the best way to escape the psycho prefect, he heard the sound of a whistle. It was barely audible, but he still heard it. So he charged at Kate and threw his blazer in his face. Kate then told him to stop trying to be smart, but Romeo just smiled and asked him to look down. Deciding to humor him, Kate looked down, and to his surprise, he saw that his legs had been tied with a belt. He was also amused and commended Romeo for his quick thinking, but the white cats began complaining, saying it wasn't the right time to be impressed by the enemy, seeing as they were distracted. Romeo rushed to the window and jumped out of it before anyone could stop him. However, he caught Juliet's hand, and she pulled up to the 4th floor balcony without anyone noticing. While there, Romeo learned how Juliet had gotten to the balcony from the room she'd been locked in and scolded her for it. When he said it had been a dangerous move, she told him they were 2 peas in a pod, since storming her dorm was risky too. Suddenly, she started crying, saying that she was worried about what would happen to him once his brother caught wind of what he'd done. Romeo assured her he'd be fine and revealed that he'd stormed into her dorm to wish her a happy birthday. Hearing this, Juliet asked if the wires in his brain had gotten mixed up because he'd done a lot of dumb things in his life, but this one took the cake. As she sobbed harder, she told him that she loved him, and Romeo responded by crying and humming her. During that time, Ayuru arrived at the White Cat's dorm and punished all the Black Dog students there. When he went looking for Romeo, Maru's friends tried to slip away unnoticed, but were caught by a White Cat prefect named Rex. The guy was built like a gym bro, but dressed like a girl, and he told the boys he'd let them go if they showed him they could be cuter than he was. When they tried to act cute, Rex punched them in the face, saying they were bad at it. He turned to Suki and asked if she wanted to join the pageant, but she refused. The next moment, Maru walked in, and surprisingly, when Rex saw him, Rex declared that Maru was the cutest person he'd ever seen. Embarrassed, Maru swore revenge, but before he could do anything, Romeo and Juliet came downstairs. The two pretended to have a pie fight, and as they announced that it had ended in a draw, Ryu returned. The prefect representative then asked his brother if the person he was seeing was Juliet, before Romeo could deny it. Ayuru backed up his statement with indisputable evidence, but Juliet told him that he was only speculating. The The White Cat supported her and demanded that Ayuru apologize for making baseless claims. Refusing to back down, Ayuru mentioned the rosary and said he'd noticed that Romeo had circled her birthday on his calendar. Juliet argued that those things didn't mean anything, so Ayuru decided to use his trump card and pulled out the plot cover he found in Romeo's room. He then told Juliet that if they cross-checked her cup size with it, they would see he was right. Immediately, shouts erupted in the room, with most people condemning Romeo, but before things could escalate, Kate stepped in. He told Ayuru there was a perfect explanation for everything, and he invited Juliet to his office to talk. Refusing to stick around, Ayuru tried to take Romeo away, but the boy became worried that his relationship with Juliet was over and he didn't want that. So, in a desperate attempt to salvage it, he turned to speak to Juliet. However, she suddenly threw a sword at him and challenged him to a duel to restore her honor. Romeo didn't understand why she was doing this, and he tried to talk her out of it, but Juliet wouldn't give him a chance and attacked him. Romeo immediately defended himself but refused to go on the offensive, still trying to figure Juliet out. Seeing that his brother wasn't attacking, Ayuru commented that their duel was a carefully planned out show. Eventually, Romeo realized that Juliet wasn't playing, so he decided to get serious too and gave her what she wanted. At some point, she pointed to her chest and told him that if he missed, she would take his life. Romeo mimicked her actions and told her to try her luck, causing the audience to fear they were fighting to the death. The two didn't seem to care for their opinions, and before anyone could react, they struck each other in the chest. Later on, Romeo and Juliet woke up in the infirmary and pulled out their broken rosaries. It turned out that when Juliet had pointed to her chest earlier, she had been telling him to aim for her rosary, and when he realized it, he pointed to where his was too, overwhelmed. Juliet began to cry and admitted she'd been afraid that things wouldn't go wrong and they would be separated forever. Instead of trying to comfort her, he pulled out the rings in his pocket and explained that it was her birthday gift. He wanted to give it to her as a promised ring and said he would try to become a prefect so that he could change the way the school was run. He put the ring on her finger and asked her to wait for him until then. Juliet promised she would and hugged him. The next day, Kate and Ayuru were scolded by their dorm coordinators for allowing the situation between Romeo and Juliet to escalate. Ayuru apologized for mishandling things but assured them it would never happen again. He also informed them that Romeo and Juliet had been confined in their dorms for the rest of the week as punishment for their actions. Just then, they realized that Kate had fallen asleep and began scolding him. A week later, after their punishment was over, Romeo and Juliet sneaked out to the lake together. Juliet asked Romeo if he was serious about becoming a prefect, and Romeo said that he was. He revealed that he'd already spoken to Ayuru about his aspiration and would begin his journey to prefectship by working as the prefect's chore boy to show her support for him. Juliet put his ring on his finger and told him not to give up. When she didn't say more, Romeo tried to get her to speak but accidentally fell into the water. Instead of pulling him out, Juliet leaned closer and told him their relationship would be acknowledged someday. Would Romeo and Juliet ever go public, or would their countries force them apart? If you got this far and enjoyed it, comment Simplord. Also, check this next video.